If you haven't done so yet, please subscribe to the channel. And if you're enjoying these stories, there's a link below to buy me a cup of coffee. This is the Chassidic Story Project with Barak Hullman, podcasting from Jerusalem, Israel. This podcast is sponsored by listeners just like you. To become a supporter of this podcast, please go to HasidicStory.com. HASIDIC story.com. You'll never know. You'll never know. You'll never know. You'll never know. Shalom Aleichem, my sweetest friends. This week is Yud Tes Kislev, which is the Chabad Chassidic holiday, referred to as the Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus, the new year of Chassidut, when Rabbi Shner Zalman of Liadi, who of course was known as the Alter Rebbe, was released from Tsarist prison in 1798. He had been arrested on false charges of treason, but was released. It's also the yahrzeit of the Maggid Mezrich, who of course was the successor of the Baal Shem Tov, who passed away in 1772. For Chabad Chassidim, and for many Chassidim, Yud Tes Kislev is considered kind of a Yom Tov, and it has more meaning than just the release of the Alter Rebbe from prison. His imprisonment was interpreted as a spiritual battle and ultimately a victory between the physical and the heavenly realms. It was understood that he was imprisoned perhaps because he shouldn't be teaching Chassidus and spreading these concepts. And when he was freed, the Alter Rebbe understood it as a sign that he should spread the well springs of Chassidus outwards. Of course, it's a whole story of its own, where the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid Mezrich came to visit the Alter Rebbe in prison in some spiritual form. So this week, the podcast is dedicated to stories of Lubavitcher Rebbes, starting with the Alter Rebbe, then the Rebbe Maharash, and ending with the last Lubavitcher Rebbe. But before we begin, I want to dedicate this podcast episode to the continued success, B'ezrat Hashem, of our soldiers in battle wherever they are. The returning of all of the hostages, whole, healthy, alive, B'ezrat Hashem. Those that are not alive to return their bodies, unfortunately. The refuah shlema, the full recovery of all of those that have been injured or who are ill. The comforting of those that lost loved ones. And unfortunately, all of us in Israel know people who were close to us who were killed in this war. And the continued unity of the Jewish people here in the land of Israel and all around the world. B'ezrat Hashem. My sweetest friends, let me share a story that happened in Vilna. Now, Vilna, you should know, was not so friendly to the Chassidim in the days of the Alter Rebbe. These days, barely anybody even thinks about the clash, the controversy between Chassidim and Misnagdim. But in the time of the Alter Rebbe, who lived from 1745 to 1812, the clash between the Chassidim and the Misnagdim was very fresh and very raw. And in those days, the opposition to the Chassidim didn't just come from simple people. It came from the great Torah scholars who were concerned that Chassidut was actually a variation of Judaism that would lead people astray and possibly off the path of Torah and mitzvot. And it's understandable. There were many changes in those years. We know America was founded in 1776. The French Revolution started in 1789. The Industrial Revolution began around 1760. These were difficult times to be a Jew, not just physically, also spiritually. And so it's understandable where the opposition came from, even though now we have the retrospect to realize that it was wrong. In Vilna, on that particular Shabbos, in the main shul, there was a holy-looking Jew who had spent the entire night learning Torah in the synagogue before Shabbos. And when Friday came, the Shamish, who took care of the shul, he asked this holy-looking Jew, "Where are you going to be for Shabbos?" And the man responded that he would like to remain in the shul, if that was possible. So the Shamish went to a wealthy householder, a Baal Habayit, who was also a Torah scholar, and he said, "Would you like to take this holy Jew into your house for Shabbos?" And when the wealthy man heard that the guest was a Torah scholar, he asked the rabbi of the shul to help influence this holy Jew to come and spend Shabbos with him. And at first when they asked him, he said, "Nope, I'm going to stay here in the shul. Not interested in going to anyone's house. I don't even need very much to eat. I'll just eat whatever I can find." But the wealthy Jew could see that this was a very special Jew, and he insisted, and the rabbi insisted, and eventually he said, "Okay, fine. I'll come for you for the meals, but I'm not going to sleep in your house. I'm only going to sleep here in the shul." So during the Friday night meal, They got into a very deep conversation about Torah, and it was very enjoyable for both of them. The Jew who was learning all night was enjoying the company and the food. The wealthy Jew was also enjoying having this holy Jew at his Shabbos table. But then something strange happened when the Shabbos meal was over. The wealthy Jew, he let out such a deep sigh. But he didn't say a word. And the guest, of course he saw it, he noticed it, but respecting his host, he didn't say anything, stayed quiet. And he went back to the shul and learned for most of the night. The next day after davening, the wealthy Jew invited this holy Yid again to come to his Shabbos table. And again at the end of the meal, he gives a big sigh. Same thing at the third meal. And even Malav Malka, when Shabbos was over, each time he gave this deep, heartbreaking sigh that it felt it came from the depth of his soul. He was crying out to Hashem. And so the holy Yid who had been learning all Shabbos was obviously a very special person. He says to the wealthy Jew, "My friend, I heard you sighing all Shabbos, and I don't mean to pry into your personal affairs, but sometimes sharing your troubles with a fellow Jew can help, and I'm more than happy to listen." So the wealthy man said he and his partner were victims of a false accusation. They had been accused of stealing money from the government, even though they hadn't. And not only that, they were found guilty and sentenced to 3 years of exile in Siberia. But because of their connections, because they were so wealthy, their case was going to go before the Senate in Petersburg. So there was still some hope. But then the wealthy man sighed again. And he said, "Ribono shel olam, only the master of the universe knows what's going to be." And when the guest heard this, he said something. He said, "I have to share a secret with you. It's not something that I would normally say here in Vilna, because there's so much opposition to the Chassidim, but I am a Chassid of the Heilige Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneir Zalman of Liadi. And I would suggest that you go to Liozna and get a bracha and an eitzah, a blessing and advice from my Rebbe. You know what? I'm going to go there myself. Why don't we go together? And Be'ezrat Hashem, by having your faith in the tzaddik, Hashem will pull you out of your troubles." So the wealthy man said, "Well, I'm not in this alone. I have to talk with my business partner." And when he went to the business partner, he was trembling. He said, "Not only will we not be saved, because of course this Rebbe is not going to do anything for us, but not only that, when word gets out here in Vilna that we went to a Chassidic Rebbe for advice, they might turn us into the government. They might beat us up. We might be destroyed completely. Who knows what will happen to us?" They didn't know what to do. The Chassid said to them, "Don't worry, everything's going to be fine." But they were worried. And so they decided to go to the great rabbi, Reb Meir Raphaels. Now Reb Meir was one of the most respected leaders in Vilna, and he was also known to be a strong opponent to the Chassidic movement. And he was one of the great Torah scholars that everybody followed in their opposition to Rebbes like the Alter Rebbe. So they went to him, but before they went to him, and this shows you how dangerous it was back then in Vilna, they made Reb Meir promise that no matter what advice he gave them, he wouldn't share it with anyone. And so they told him the story about the holy Shabbos guest, and he suggested that they go to the Alter Rebbe for a blessing, and they wanted the advice of Reb Meir. And Reb Meir, without any hesitation, he said, "Go to Liozna." Now you have to understand how extraordinary this was. This was a great rabbi and a leader who was known for his opposition to the Chassidim. But when it came to saving these two Jews from going to Siberia, he put aside all of his personal opinions and reservations. And he figured, if he didn't know what to do, what do they have to lose? Go to the tzaddik and maybe he'll be able to help. Because Jewish lives were at stake. And so they prepared their wagon and they took their guests with them to Liozna. When they came before the holy Alter Rebbe, they poured out their hearts to him, and the Alter Rebbe listened very deeply. And then he said to them something that seemed completely unconnected to their problem. What do our sages mean when they say that the kingdom of earth is similar to the kingdom of heaven? So the two businessmen had no idea how to answer the Alter Rebbe. And so he revealed to them the deepest Torah, my sweetest friends. The Talmud teaches about the verse, "This is my name forever." Just as God's name is written one way but pronounced another, we write the letters of Hashem's name but we don't pronounce it the way it's written because that's forbidden, so too it is with an earthly king. The Tsar has his personal name, but it's forbidden to call him by his name. You only call him the Tsar or your highness. So the two businessmen are nodding their heads. Okay. And they're looking at their friend the Chassid. And he has his hands up and he says, "Don't ask me, I don't know what's going on here, but just trust the Rebbe." And that's it. The Rebbe said, Bracha v'atzlacha, you should be blessed with success. So these two businessmen left astonished. How was this going to help them? This esoteric advice, quoting something about Hashem's name in the kingdom of heaven? So they realized the Alter Rebbe wasn't going to help them. As the time got closer, they went to the capital city, started going from lawyer to lawyer, trying to find someone who could help them, but every lawyer said it was hopeless. Finally, one lawyer suggested that their only hope might be that if they can find the Minister of Justice and fall at his feet and beg him for mercy, maybe he could help them. So they had money, they knew how to bribe people, so they started asking around, how do we get into the Minister of Justice? And when they learned that making an appointment was impossible, someone said every day the Minister of Justice goes for a walk in a private garden at the same time. So if you bribe the guard at the entrance to let you in, he'll signal to you which one is the minister, and then, Bezat Hashem, you'll be able to beg for mercy. So they went and they bribed the guard, and they got into the private garden, but on that day, the justice minister was sick, and he didn't come to the garden. Instead, the minister of culture came for a walk. And so the two Jewish businessmen are sitting on a bench in this beautiful private park, surrounded by a fence with a guard, and the guard opens the gate for the Minister of Culture, and he signals to the two Jewish businessmen that this is not the Minister of Justice. But they misunderstood him. They thought he was signaling them to approach the minister. So they ran over to the minister, and they fell at his feet, and they're pouring out their whole story begging for help. And the minister says, "Gentlemen, I'm sorry, but I'm the Minister of Culture. Your request is for the Minister of Justice, and I'm sorry, but I'm unable to help you." And so the two businessmen were devastated. But then something amazing happened. Just as they were walking away, the minister called the guard, and he said, "Quick, run and bring those two Jews back." Now the guard was scared because he had let in people that he wasn't supposed to. He took a bribe, and he thought that the minister had figured it out and was going to kill all three of them. But he didn't have a choice. He ran after the two Jewish businessmen, and all three of them were trembling with fear. And what does the minister ask them? He says, "Listen, maybe you two can help me." He said, "I can see you two are learned Jews. You're distinguished gentlemen. I have many conversations with the Tsar. The Tsar asked me a question, and if you can answer the question, I will speak to the Tsar on your behalf, and I will ask him to annul your case. And the Tsar said to me, there's something in your Talmud that doesn't make sense to him. What does it mean when the sages in your Talmud said that the kingdom of earth is similar to the kingdom of heaven?" Now the Minister of Culture says to these two Jewish businessmen, "The Tsar asked me this, and I don't have an answer for him." The Tsar is quite obsessed with this. He says, "I'm the king here on earth. How is it similar to the kingdom of heaven?" And so they gave the Rebbe's answer, that just like Hashem's name is written one way, but you don't pronounce it, the same thing with the Tsar. Even though he has a private name, you don't say it. You call him the Tsar or your honor. And the Minister of Culture liked the answer, and he promised that he would go to the Tsar and speak on their behalf and ask him to annul the decree against them. And so it was. He went before the Tsar, and he told the Tsar that he had met these two Jews and asked them the question, and the answer found favor in the eyes of the Tsar. And then the Minister of Culture asked the Tsar to nullify the judgment against the two Jews, and he also believed that these two Jews were innocent, and so the Tsar ordered the Senate to annul their case. And so the two businessmen went back to Vilna, victorious. When they got back to Vilna, they went straight to the home of Reb Meir Raphaels and told him everything that had happened. And then Reb Meir, the great scholar, who had been opposed to the Chassidim out of genuine concern, saw such clear evidence that the Alter Rebbe's vision was pure and not affected by anything negative. He decided to go to the Alter Rebbe, become a Chassid himself. So you see, my sweetest friends, this is one of the deepest Torahs. Sometimes our salvation comes from places we never expected, and we can learn from Reb Meir Raphaels, who was humble enough and big enough to put aside his own ego and his own views to help those two Jewish businessmen. May we merit to have such clear light in our lives, my friends, and have the holy chutzpah, the holy audacity, to lead us out of the darkness. I have another story for you. The story took place in 1882, in the time of the Rebbe Marash, Rabbi Shmuel Schneerson, who lived from 1834 to 1882. The Rebbe Marash was the youngest son of the Tzemach Tzedek, who was the third Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he became the Rebbe after his father passed away. He's most famously known for his approach called the Chatchila Riber, which means rather than going under or around an obstacle, one should go directly over it from the start. So there was a chassid of the Rebbe Marash who was drafted into the Tsar's army. And you know, my friends, in those days when you were drafted into the Tsar's army, it was a lot of times a death sentence. And if it wasn't a death sentence physically, it probably would be spiritually. And young Jewish men in those days were drafted into the army for at least 15 years. The army wasn't just about fighting wars. It was a tool to make, God forbid, Jews leave their faith. They would do anything they could to make these young men convert. And there was one young man, whose name was Chaim Ber Melamed, who was strong as an ox, tall and healthy, mamish what the army was looking for. And when he got his draft notice, his heart skipped a beat. He knew if he was drafted, there was no hope for him. So what do? When you have no hope, you go to the Holy Rebbe. And he went to the Holy Rebbe Marash. Now, normally you would have to wait weeks to see the Rebbe, but there were so many Jewish soldiers being drafted, the Rebbe had a special rule. Any Jewish soldier came in right away. So Chaim Ber, he hitches up his wagon, heads straight to Lubavitch. And when he gets there, he's led straight into the Rebbe's room. But before he could even open his mouth, the Rebbe looked at him and said, "You will not go to the army." That's all he needed to hear. Chaim Ber was a chassid. The Rebbe said he won't go to the army, he won't go to the army. You know, he went to the Rebbe so dark and sad and depressed, but he came home dancing with joy. He sat down, started learning, knowing everything was going to be fine. But then, just days before his army medical examination, something shocking happened. The Rebbe passed away. Chaim Ber was so shaken, he didn't know what to do, because the Rebbe had promised him that he wouldn't go to the army. But if the Rebbe wasn't there davening for him, what was going to happen? He thought maybe he should run away, but he was scared that he would get caught. And his mind was spinning. He didn't know what to do. And day after day passed until the day of his medical examination came. And he wondered, does the Rebbe's blessing still work, even when the Rebbe is no longer physically in this world? So he was saying Tehillim whenever he could. And as he was walking up the stairs to the doctor's office for the first examination, he feels somebody walking right behind him, almost on his heels. He turns around, he wants to say something, give me a little space, man. But who does he see when he turns around? The Rebbe Marash himself. The Rebbe Marash was standing behind Chaim Ber. Now Chaim Ber had been at the Rebbe's funeral, and he broke out into a cold sweat. He loosened his collar and was scared to turn around again. But when he reached the doctor's door, he couldn't help himself. He turned around one more time, and there's the Rebbe Marash standing there, staring him straight in the eye. Chaim Ber was so shocked to see the Rebbe, who was no longer physically in this world, that he started shaking uncontrollably. And just then the doctor opened the door, and he sees this young man who's sweating. His face is white. He's shaking like crazy, and the doctor puts his stethoscope on Chaim Ber's chest, and his eyes open up from shock. He says, "Young man, you have a very unhealthy heart. Get out of here. You're completely unfit for military service." And with that, Chaim Ber was released from the Tsar's army. The Rebbe had kept his promise. And this teaches us something so deep, my friends, that the Rebbe's blessing and the Rebbe's protection continues even beyond this world. The Rebbe Marash appeared on those stairs not just to save Chaim Ber, but to show us all that the Rebbe's promise is forever and that his love for his Chassidim never ends. May we always merit to have such a deep connection with the Rebbes and the Tzaddikim. Be'ezrat Hashem. So just to add to the joy of Yud Tes Kislev, I have one more story for you, a short one, but one more. Rabbi Shmaryahu Gurari, who was known as the Rashag, was married to the previous Rebbe's older daughter. And after the previous Rebbe's passing in 1950, there was a lot of tension about who was going to be the next Rebbe. And many thought that the Rashag would be the Rebbe since he was both the son-in-law of the previous Rebbe and had been deeply involved in the yeshiva's administration. However, the majority of the Chassidim looked at Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson to be the Rebbe, who was married, of course, to the previous Rebbe's younger daughter. So let me share a story with you, my sweetest friends, that touches on the deepest mystery of what a Rebbe truly is. In 1951, just after Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson had accepted the leadership of Chabad Lubavitch, there was still so much pain over the passing of the previous Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, and the Rashag, Rabbi Shmaryahu Gerari, was traveling to Chicago to meet a longtime supporter of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. And it was a difficult time, of course. The Rashag himself had to adjust to the new reality where his brother-in-law, who was married to the younger daughter, was now the Rebbe. But there was work to be done to support the yeshiva and keep the previous Rebbe's institution strong. And so he traveled to Chicago to meet with this generous supporter. And expecting a large contribution of $1,000 or more, the wealthy Jew gave only $18. This was much less than his usual generous donations. So the Rashag said to him, the yeshiva really needs support, and I'm surprised that you're giving so little, considering how much you used to give. And the wealthy Jew said, Rabbi Gerari, this is what I give to all the institutions that I respect. It's true that before I gave much more money, but that was because of my great respect and reverence for your father-in-law, the previous Rebbe. I loved him with all my heart, and I would do anything for him in his institutions. Now the great Rebbe is no longer living with us, and so I have a great deal of respect for Chabad Lubavitch, but I've decided to give you my regular donation of $18. So the Rashag understood how much the yeshiva needed the larger donation, and he decided to make a call to New York to speak with the new Lubavitcher Rebbe. And after the call, he went back to the wealthy Jew, and he said, I want you to know that I called my brother-in-law, the Rebbe, to ask him for advice. And the Rebbe said something that revealed the deepest spiritual continuation. And the Rebbe said to tell you that it's the same Neshama, it's the same soul, just in a different body. Just like a flame lights another flame without taking away from its own light, and water goes from one vessel to the next, and it's the same water, so too the essence of the Rebbe's soul continues uninterrupted. The body may be different, but the light and the essential connection remains exactly the same. And when the wealthy Jew heard these words, something shifted inside of him, and immediately he gave the large donation, even more than $1,000, and continued to do so for many years to come, because he understood that this wasn't about the physical person who was the Rebbe, but the eternal light of the Neshama that continues to shine and guide the Chassidim. You see, my sweetest friends, when we connect to a Rebbe, we're connecting to something beyond the physical, something eternal. Be'ezrat Hashem, may we all merit to see beyond the physical and connect with the infinite light that comes down through all of the stories of all the Rebbes and the Rebbitzins that I tell. Be'ezrat Hashem, we should continue to grow in Torah and Chassidus. Good Yantev, L'Shana Tova, B'limud HaChassidut, V'daukei HaChassidut, Tichtevehu v'tachtemehu, my sweetest friends. thank you so much for listening as always. Next week, I'll be releasing the Hanukkah episode, which I'm calling kind of a super episode because it'll carry us through 2 weeks, B'ezrat Hashem. So thank you again for listening. Thank you to all the contributors of the podcast and all the sponsors and all of everyone. Thank you for listening and sharing and for leaving me comments and for writing to me and saying hi to me. And until next week, my sweetest friends, have a beautiful Shabbos and a beautiful week. Take care of yourselves. Sei gesund.